My name is Estelle, and I'm 58 years old. I've spent most of my life working 3 part-time jobs to raise my son Marcus as a single mother. I clean offices at night, serve coffee in the mornings, and work weekends at the local laundromat. When Marcus told me he was marrying Sophia, a girl from one of those wealthy Silicon Valley families, I was thrilled for him, but I had no idea what was waiting for me at their wedding. Before I share what happened that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button. Trust me, you'll want to stay for this one, because what her father did next left everyone speechless. I never expected to be a single mother, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. My father died when I was 16, leaving my mother to struggle with 3 kids and mounting bills. When I got pregnant with Marcus at 20, his father disappeared the moment he heard the news. I made the decision right then that my son would never feel abandoned the way I did. Those early years were the hardest thing I'd ever experienced. I worked the night shift, cleaning office buildings downtown, starting at midnight and finishing at 6 in the morning. Then I'd rush home, shower, and head to my morning job at Corner Cafe, serving coffee and breakfast sandwiches to the business crowd until 2 in the afternoon. Weekends meant 8-hour shifts at Murphy's laundromat folding clothes and operating the industrial washers. My little apartment in the older part of town wasn't much, but it was ours. The walls were thin and the radiator made strange noises all winter. But Marcus had his own small bedroom, and I made sure it was filled with books instead of toys we couldn't afford. I'd read to him every night after my shifts, even when exhaustion made my eyes burn and my voice crack. Every penny I earned went toward rent, food, and the college fund I started when he was just 2 years old. I shopped at thrift stores and clipped coupons religiously. We ate a lot of pasta and beans because they were filling and affordable. Marcus never complained, not once. He understood from an early age that things were tight, but I made sure he never felt deprived of love or attention. On his birthdays, I'd save for months to buy him one meaningful gift, usually books or educational games that would help him excel in school. The neighborhood we lived in wasn't the safest, but I worked extra hours to afford an apartment in the district with better schools. I walked Marcus to school every morning before my cafe shift and picked him up afterward, making sure he was never unsupervised. Evenings were spent at the kitchen table, helping him with homework, while I ate dinner, standing up already dressed for my night shift. Marcus was brilliant from the start. His teachers constantly praised his dedication and intelligence, often mentioning how unusual it was to see such focus in a child his age. He won spelling bees, science fairs, and essay contests throughout elementary school. I attended every single event, sometimes arriving straight from work with cleaning supplies still tucked in my purse, but always there to cheer him on. High school brought new challenges as academic demands increased. Marcus needed tutoring for advanced calculus, which I couldn't afford, so I bartered with his teacher, offering to clean her house in exchange for extra help sessions. He participated in debate team, student government, and academic Olympics, and I found ways to support these activities even when participation fees stretched our budget to breaking point. When he graduated high school as valedictorian, Harvard offered him a full scholarship for his MBA program. I cried in the grocery store parking lot when he called with the news, startling other shoppers with my sobs of relief and joy. All those years of sacrifice, all those nights when I fell asleep at the kitchen table after working 16-hour days, had finally paid off. My boy was going to have the opportunities I'd only dreamed about. College meant 4 years of missing him terribly, but knowing he was building the future we'd worked so hard to achieve. He called every Sunday, sharing stories about his classes, his professors, and the internships that would lead to his career. I lived for those phone calls, saving up small victories from my week to share with him. After graduation, Marcus landed a position at Henderson Consulting, a prestigious firm downtown. He rented a nice apartment in the city and started building the successful life I'd always envisioned for him. For the first time in decades, I could relax slightly, knowing my mission as his mother had succeeded. That's when he met Sophia at a corporate networking event. She was 26, beautiful, and came from the kind of family that owned mansions instead of renting apartments. Marcus was smitten from their first conversation, and when he brought her to meet me, I could see the love in his eyes. Despite my concerns about their different backgrounds, I was genuinely happy that he'd found someone who made him smile the way Sophia did. But there were subtle signs that made me increasingly uneasy as their relationship progressed. Sophia always called me Mrs. Thompson, never Mum. Despite Marcus's gentle encouragement, she'd talk enthusiastically about expensive restaurants and exotic vacations places Marcus could never afford on his consultant salary. I noticed how he'd grow quiet during these conversations, and sometimes I caught him looking embarrassed when she casually mentioned my work situation. Marcus began calling less frequently, and when we did talk, something felt fundamentally different. He seemed to choose his words carefully, avoiding topics that had once been natural parts of our conversations. When I asked about wedding plans, he'd give vague answers and change the subject quickly. I sensed he was struggling with something, but didn't know how to help without overstepping boundaries. When Marcus called to announce their engagement 6 months later, I was overjoyed, but I noticed immediately that I wasn't included in any of the planning discussions. Sophia handled everything with her mother Patricia, and I felt like an outsider looking in at my own son's wedding preparations. When I offered to help with simple tasks like addressing invitations or organizing favors, I was politely told that everything was already under control. 2 months before the wedding, they invited me to dinner at the Wellington estate to properly meet the family. The invitation came through Marcus, not Sophia, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice when he called. I spent days agonizing over what to wear, finally settling on my best dress and a cardigan I'd bought for job interviews years earlier. I drove my 15-year-old Honda Civic through the gates of their Malibu mansion, feeling completely out of place among the perfectly manicured gardens and ocean views that stretched to the horizon. The driveway was circular, lined with expensive cars that probably cost more than I'd earned in several years combined. A uniformed housekeeper answered the door, instead of the family leading me through marble hallways adorned with original artwork to a dining room that could have seated 20 people comfortably. Richard Wellington was exactly what I'd expected from someone featured on Forbes magazine covers. At 52, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that comes from building a technology empire from scratch. His handshake was firm but brief, and he was polite but reserved, making small talk about traffic and weather before returning to his evening newspaper. He seemed to be studying me, though I couldn't decipher his expression. Patricia, Sophia's mother, was a former runway model who'd maintained her striking appearance at 48. Her smile was practiced and beautiful, but there was something cold behind her perfectly applied makeup. She moved with the grace of someone accustomed to being admired and led the conversation with questions that felt more like an interrogation than friendly interest. The dining room table was set with more silverware than I'd ever seen outside of restaurants, and I spent the first few minutes discreetly watching the family to determine which fork to use for which course. The conversation was excruciating. Patricia peppered me with questions about my career, her tone making it clear she expected something more impressive than cleaning offices and serving coffee. When I honestly explained my 3 jobs, describing how I'd built my schedule around Marcus's needs throughout his childhood, the silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that enormous room. Sophia quickly changed the subject to their honeymoon plans in Europe, but I caught Patricia's knowing glance across the table and Richard's continued observation of the entire interaction. Marcus tried to fill the awkward silence by praising my sacrifices and explaining how I'd supported his education, but his words seemed to make Patricia even more uncomfortable. She kept steering the conversation toward topics that highlighted the differences between our families: private schools, country clubs, vacation homes, and social connections I'd never heard of. After dessert was served on china that probably cost more than my monthly rent, Patricia pulled me aside into their living room with what she presented as a generous offer. She wanted to take me shopping for a suitable outfit for the wedding, explaining sweetly that the guest list included very important people and proper attire would be essential for photographs and social media coverage of the event. Her tone was gracious and motherly, but her meaning was crystal clear. My clothes weren't good enough for their social circle, and she was worried I'd embarrass the family. She mentioned specific designers and boutiques, suggesting we could find something appropriate that would photograph well and help me feel more comfortable among their distinguished guests. I politely declined explaining that I'd already purchased something appropriate for the occasion. What I didn't mention was that I'd been saving for 6 months to buy a simple but elegant navy dress from an outlet store. It wasn't designer, wasn't expensive, but it was respectable and within my carefully planned budget. I'd also found matching shoes and a small purse that coordinated perfectly. During the drive home, Marcus was unusually quiet, staring out the passenger window at the expensive neighborhoods we passed. When I finally asked what was troubling him, he turned to me with conflicted eyes and said, "Everything will work out, Mom. Just try to understand that Sophia's nervous about the wedding. Her family has certain expectations." I spent the following weeks with a growing sense of dread, but I was absolutely determined to attend my son's wedding with dignity, regardless of how uncomfortable the Wellington family made me feel. I practiced walking in my new shoes and rehearsed polite conversations I might have with their sophisticated guests. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 5 a.m. with butterflies dancing in my stomach, like teenagers at their first dance. I'd planned every detail of my preparation timeline, from the time I'd leave for my hair appointment to the specific route I'd take to avoid weekend traffic near the beach. My navy dress hung carefully on the closet door, freshly pressed and ready, along with my matching accessories, laid out with military precision. I'd chosen a small salon in my neighborhood for my hair and makeup. Nothing fancy or expensive, but Maria, my hairdresser, had been styling hair for 30 years and knew how to make women feel beautiful on special occasions. She swept my graying hair into an elegant updo that made me look sophisticated and applied subtle makeup that enhanced my features without making me feel like someone else entirely. Looking in the salon mirror, I saw a woman who belonged at her son's wedding, regardless of what anyone else might think. The reflection showed someone who'd worked hard, sacrificed greatly, and earned her place at this celebration through decades of unconditional love. The ceremony was held at Pelican Point Resort in Newport Beach, the kind of exclusive destination I'd only seen in magazines featuring celebrity weddings and society events. The grounds were breathtaking, with manicured lawns that looked like green carpet and flower arrangements that probably cost more than most people's cars. When I pulled up to the valet station in my Honda Civic, I noticed the attendant's surprised expression as he looked at my modest car among the fleet of BMWs, Mercedes Teslas, and even a few Ferraris already parked. The young man was professional, but I could see him processing the contrast. I tipped him the $5 I'd budgeted and walked toward the ceremony location with my head held high and my shoulders straight. The wedding chapel was decorated with thousands of white roses imported from Ecuador, flowing silk drapes that moved gently in the ocean breeze, and crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow patterns on the white marble floors. 300 guests filled the space, and I quickly realized I recognized absolutely no one except Marcus. The other attendees were clearly from Sophia's world: business executives in perfectly tailored suits, politicians I'd seen on television, and socialites dressed in designer outfits that probably cost more than I earned in several months. I found my assigned seat in the back row, far from the family sections where the Wellingtons sat, surrounded by their closest friends and business associates. The other guests in my area seemed pleasant enough, offering polite smiles and nods, but no one initiated conversation beyond basic pleasantries about the beautiful weather and elegant decorations. The ceremony began with a string quartet playing classical music I didn't recognize, but found beautiful nonetheless. Marcus looked extraordinarily handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, standing at the altar, with nervous excitement written across his familiar face. When the bridal march began and Sophia appeared at the back of the chapel, she truly looked like something from a fairy tale. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of design and craftsmanship, reportedly costing $50,000, according to whispered conversations I overheard. The silk flowed behind her like water, and her veil was decorated with tiny pearls that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. Despite everything, tears of genuine joy filled my eyes as I watched my son marry the woman he loved. The reception was held in the resort's grand ballroom, a space that could have housed my entire apartment building. Crystal chandeliers hung from a painted ceiling that belonged in a European palace, and gold accents sparkled under soft lighting designed to make everyone look their most attractive. Round tables were dressed in ivory linens and decorated with towering flower arrangements that blocked conversation between guests. I was seated at table 23, the furthest possible distance from the head table, where Marcus and Sophia sat with their immediate families. My table mates were some of Marcus's work colleagues I'd never met, along with a few distant relatives of Sophia's who seemed equally out of place among the corporate elite and society figures filling the other tables. The 7-course dinner featured foods with names I couldn't pronounce and preparation methods I'd never encountered. Truffle oil microgreens and delicate sauces accompanied proteins I wasn't sure how to identify. There were more pieces of silverware at my place setting than I owned in my entire apartment, and I watched the other guests carefully trying to follow their lead without appearing obvious. When a woman at my table asked about my business during the soup course, I explained my actual work honestly. Her expression changed noticeably afterward, and she quickly turned to discuss stock portfolios and investment strategies with the businessman beside her. Similar conversations happened throughout the evening, each interaction reminding me how different my world was from this one. As the evening progressed into the reception's main events, the master of ceremonies, a professional who'd apparently handled many high-profile weddings, announced that it was time for family speeches. My heart skipped several beats when he called for remarks from the groom's family, and I realized with growing panic that 300 expectant faces were turning in my direction. I hadn't been told I'd be speaking. No one had mentioned speeches during any of our previous conversations, and I certainly hadn't prepared anything to say. Marcus looked toward me with an expression that was part encouragement, part apology, and I understood that this surprise had been sprung on both of us. The walk to the microphone felt like the longest journey of my life. My legs felt unsteady in my new shoes, and my hands began trembling as I approached the small stage area where a podium had been set up. The ballroom's conversation died away completely as I climbed the few steps, and suddenly 300 pairs of eyes were focused solely on me. I gripped the podium with both hands, looking out at the sea of expectant faces. Some looked genuinely interested, others appeared politely tolerant, and a few seemed to be checking their expensive watches. I could see Marcus at the head table, his expression encouraging, but visibly tense. Sophia sat beside him, her smile looking increasingly forced as seconds ticked by. I began with simple words of gratitude, thanking Sophia and her family for welcoming Marcus into their lives and for organizing such a beautiful celebration. My voice was shakier than I'd intended, but I pushed through the nervousness and began sharing what was truly in my heart. I told them about the journey of raising Marcus alone, about the pride I felt watching him succeed academically and professionally, and about the joy of seeing him find love with someone who made him so happy. I shared stories about his childhood determination, his kindness toward others, and his unwavering integrity in everything he pursued. My voice wavered with emotion as I spoke about the sacrifices we'd both made and how they'd led to this beautiful moment. I talked about working multiple jobs while he studied about how we'd supported each other through difficult times and about the values that had guided our small family through 2 decades of challenges. Some guests seemed genuinely moved by my words. I could see tears forming in several eyes, understanding nods from other parents in the audience, and smiles of appreciation from people who recognized the universal story of parental love and sacrifice. But I also noticed Patricia Wellington rolling her eyes slightly, Sophia shifting uncomfortably in her chair, and whispered conversations starting at some tables. As I began to conclude my speech, thanking everyone for sharing this special day and expressing my hopes for Marcus and Sophia's future happiness, Sophia suddenly pushed back her chair and stood up. The scraping sound cut through my words, and the entire ballroom's attention shifted to her as she walked purposefully toward the podium. She reached me just as I was finishing my final sentence, and without any warning or explanation, she took the microphone directly from my hands. Her movement was so abrupt and unexpected that I stumbled slightly, catching myself on the podium's edge, while the entire room fell into stunned silence. "I'm sorry everyone has to listen to this," Sophia said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system with a tone I'd never heard from her before. It was cold, sharp, and completely devoid of the warmth she usually showed Marcus. "Mrs. Thompson, my mother-in-law, seems to have misunderstood her role here tonight." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt my knees go weak. I stood frozen beside her, watching her face transform into something cold and unfamiliar, nothing like the young woman I'd tried so hard to welcome into our family. "She's a nice woman," Sophia continued, looking directly at me with eyes that had gone completely hard. "But this is our wedding attended by successful, accomplished people. Hearing about financial struggles and blue-collar work is frankly inappropriate and makes everyone uncomfortable. This is embarrassing." She paused dramatically, letting her words sink in, while I stood there in complete shock, unable to process what was happening. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. 300 people holding their collective breath as this public humiliation unfolded before them. "I think it would be best," Sophia said with finality, "if you left the reception now and allowed us to continue with our celebration." She thrust the microphone back into my hands and stepped away, leaving me standing alone on the small stage, while the most important moment of my son's life became the most humiliating moment of mine. The silence that followed Sophia's words was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet. It was a complete absence of sound, as if 300 people had collectively stopped breathing. I stood there holding the microphone, my mind completely blank, unable to process what had just happened in front of all these strangers. I looked toward Marcus, desperate for him to stand up to defend me, to show that the values I'd taught him meant something. But he sat frozen in his chair, staring down at his untouched dinner plate, his face red with shame and conflict. His silence cut deeper than his wife's words ever could. After 38 years of fighting for him, he wouldn't even look at me when I needed him most. The weight of 300 stares pressed down on me like a physical force. Some faces showed shock, others displayed uncomfortable sympathy, and a few revealed barely concealed relief that someone else was experiencing public humiliation instead of them. Patricia Wellington's expression showed satisfaction, as if this outcome had been her plan all along. Without saying a word, I gently placed the microphone back on the podium. My hands were steadier now than they'd been when I started speaking, and I realized that shock had somehow calmed my nerves. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and began the longest walk of my life back toward my table to collect my purse and dignity. Every step across that marble floor echoed in the absolute silence. I could feel hundreds of eyes tracking my movement, but I kept my pace measured and my spine straight. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me run or break down. Whatever else happened, I would leave this place with my head held high. I reached my table and picked up my small purse, nodding politely to my table mates, who looked at me with expressions of sympathy and horror. The businessman who'd ignored me earlier actually started to stand, as if he wanted to say something, but I shook my head slightly and continued toward the exit. Just as I was halfway to the ballroom doors, I heard the unmistakable sound of a chair being pushed back forcefully. The noise cut through the silence like a gunshot, startling everyone and causing heads to turn in unison toward the source of the sound. Richard Wellington had risen from his seat at the head table. His face was grave, his jaw set in a way that suggested barely controlled anger, and his eyes were focused directly on me. Without a word of explanation to his table companions, he stepped away from his seat and began walking across the ballroom toward me. The silence somehow deepened as this powerful CEO crossed the space between us. His footsteps on the marble floor were the only sound in the enormous room, and I could sense the collective tension of 300 people trying to understand what was about to happen. When Richard reached me, he stopped directly in front of where I stood, close enough that I could see the controlled fury in his eyes wasn't directed at me, but at what had just transpired. For a moment that felt like an eternity. We looked at each other, and I saw something in his expression that I hadn't expected, genuine respect and what looked like deep regret. Then, to the absolute shock of everyone present, this powerful man who commanded boardrooms and influenced government policy slowly and deliberately bowed his head to me. The gesture was unmistakable in its respect and reverence, and the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the silent ballroom, "I apologize on behalf of my family for what just happened. That is not how we treat a woman who has sacrificed her entire life for her child." He straightened up and turned slightly to address the entire room, his voice growing stronger and more authoritative with each word. "I need to tell everyone here something important that I should have shared before tonight. I already knew about Mrs. Thompson before this evening. My company Wellington Tech contracts with Morrison Cleaning Services, where she works, and I've seen her there many times over the past several years." A murmur rippled through the crowd as guests processed this unexpected information. Sophia's face had gone completely pale, and she gripped the back of her chair as if she needed support to remain standing. "Last year I was working late on a crucial acquisition deal and found myself in the office past midnight. Mrs. Thompson was there diligently cleaning our conference rooms, and we struck up a conversation while I took a break from reviewing contracts." Richard's voice grew warmer as he continued the story. "She told me about her son, who was studying for his Harvard MBA, about how proud she was of his academic achievements and his character. She spoke about working 3 jobs to support his education, about the sacrifices she'd made to give him opportunities she'd never had." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "She had no idea who I was. To her, I was just another businessman working late, but I was profoundly moved by the love and pride that lit up her eyes when she spoke of Marcus. Here was a woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to ensuring her son could succeed." Richard turned slightly to address different sections of the ballroom. "We talked for nearly an hour that night about the challenges of raising children, about the importance of education, and about the values that truly matter in life. Mrs. Thompson impressed me more in that single conversation than most people do in years of professional interaction." Now he looked directly at Marcus, his expression serious. "When your son applied for his position at Henderson Consulting, 6 months later, I was asked to provide a reference for a promising candidate. I didn't hesitate to give Marcus my strongest recommendation, not because he would eventually become my son-in-law, but because I respected the values and work ethic that his mother had clearly instilled in him." Richard turned to face his daughter, his disappointment clearly visible to everyone in the room. "Sophia, you have been blinded by superficial concerns about social status and what you think other people expect from us. You've lost sight of what actually matters: character integrity and the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult." He looked back at me, his expression softer now. "Mrs. Thompson, you raised an exceptional young man through your own example of hard work, sacrifice, and unconditional love. You deserve nothing but admiration and respect for what you've accomplished, and I'm honored to call you family." The impact of Richard's words was immediate and transformative. What started as scattered, uncertain applause quickly grew into sustained clapping, as guests throughout the ballroom began standing and joining in. The sound filled the enormous space, washing away the horrible silence that had preceded it, and creating an entirely different energy in the room. The applause continued for what felt like several minutes, with more and more people rising from their seats. Some guests were wiping tears from their eyes, clearly moved by the story Richard had shared. Others nodded in approval, and I could hear murmured comments of "incredible" and "what a wonderful mother" from nearby tables. Sophia remained frozen near the podium, her face a mask of shock and growing horror as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. She'd publicly humiliated someone in front of the most important people in her family's social and business circles, and now her own father was not only condemning her actions, but revealing information that made her behavior even more inexcusable. Marcus finally found his courage and his voice. He pushed back from the head table so forcefully that his chair toppled backward, and he rushed across the ballroom to my side. Tears were streaming down his face as he wrapped his arms around me, and his entire body shook with emotion. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered against my shoulder, his voice breaking with each word. "I should have protected you. I should have spoken up immediately. I was a coward, and I hate myself for sitting there like a statue when you needed me most." He pulled back to look at me, his eyes red and desperate. "I've been so worried about fitting into this world, about being worthy of Sophia's family, that I forgot who I really am and where I came from. I forgot that you're the reason I have anything to be proud of in the first place." Marcus turned to face the assembled guests, his voice stronger now, despite the tears still flowing. "I want everyone here to know that my mother is the strongest, most selfless person I've ever known. She worked herself to exhaustion for decades to give me opportunities, and she deserves nothing but respect and gratitude. I failed her tonight in the worst possible way, and I'll regret that failure for the rest of my life." As he spoke, Sophia finally stepped down from the platform area, her legs unsteady as she made her way toward us. Her elaborate wedding dress rustled with each step, and her carefully applied makeup was now streaked with tears. Her hands trembled visibly as she stopped in front of me, and when she tried to speak, her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mrs. Thompson," she began, then stopped to take a shaky breath. "I don't know what came over me up there. I was so worried about what people would think, so terrified of being judged by my parents' friends and business associates, that I became someone I don't even recognize." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup further. "I've been anxious about this wedding for months, worried about living up to expectations and maintaining appearances. But that's no excuse for what I did to you. You didn't deserve that cruelty, and I understand completely if you can never forgive me." Looking into her eyes, I saw genuine remorse mixed with fear. Not fear of social embarrassment, but fear of having permanently damaged something important. Despite the pain she'd caused, I could see the young woman Marcus had fallen in love with underneath all that anxiety and misplaced priority. "Honey," I said softly, reaching out to touch her arm. "We all make mistakes when we're scared and overwhelmed, but family means we support each other through difficulties, not tear each other down in front of others. What matters now is that you recognize what happened and want to make it right." Richard stepped forward again and gestured toward the band leader. "Please resume the music," he announced to the room. "I think this reception needs a fresh start and a proper celebration." Then he turned to me with a slight smile and extended his hand. "Mrs. Thompson, would you honor me with this dance? I think we could all use a moment to reset and remember what we're really here to celebrate." As we moved onto the dance floor together, Richard spoke quietly, so only I could hear. "I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive my daughter. She's young and made a terrible error in judgment, but she truly does have a good heart underneath all that social anxiety. This experience might be exactly what she needed to understand what really matters." The band played a gentle waltz, and as we danced, other couples began joining us on the floor. The atmosphere in the room had completely transformed from the tension and shock of earlier. Marcus danced with Sophia, both of them talking earnestly, while tears continued to flow clearly, working through the crisis their marriage had faced before it even truly began. The remainder of the evening was entirely different from what anyone had expected. Instead of being the outsider looking in, I found myself surrounded by guests who wanted to hear more of my story and express their admiration for the journey I'd taken as a single mother. Several business owners approached me with genuine offers of better employment opportunities, though I politely explained that I valued my independence and had no immediate plans to change my situation. 6 months have passed since that unforgettable wedding night, and the changes in our family relationships have been nothing short of remarkable. What started as the worst moment of humiliation in my life has somehow transformed into the foundation for deeper, more authentic connections with the people I love most. Sophia calls me every week now, and these aren't obligatory check-ins with her mother-in-law. She genuinely wants to be part of my life and to understand the experiences that shaped both Marcus and me. She's started volunteering at Hope Harbor, a local organization that helps single mothers find job training and childcare support. She told me she wants to understand and help women facing the challenges I once navigated alone. Last month, Sophia surprised me by asking if I'd teach her some of my practical skills. She'd grown up with housekeepers and never learned basic things like cooking nutritious meals on a budget or managing household expenses efficiently. We spend Saturday mornings together now, and she's become genuinely skilled at meal planning and coupon strategies that she never imagined she'd need or want to know. She's also begun questioning many of the social expectations she grew up with. Recently, she told me she'd started declining invitations to events that felt superficial or exclusive, preferring to spend time on activities that felt more meaningful. The change in her personality has been gradual but profound, and I can see why Marcus fell in love with the person she's becoming. Marcus has grown into the man I always knew he could be, but in ways I hadn't fully expected. He no longer feels ashamed of where he came from, and he speaks proudly about my work and sacrifices when meeting new colleagues or friends. Our relationship has deepened beyond the traditional mother and child bond into a genuine friendship between two adults who respect each other completely. He's also made significant changes in his own priorities. Instead of pursuing the highest-paying positions available, he's chosen work that aligns with his values, even when it means earning less money. He volunteers as a mentor for first-generation college students, helping young people who remind him of his own journey navigate the challenges of higher education without family roadmaps. Richard Wellington has become an unexpected friend and ally. He calls occasionally to check on me, and our conversations have evolved from polite small talk to genuine discussions about family values and the challenges of raising children in a complex world. His company did offer me a full-time position with significantly better pay and benefits. Recognizing that I'd been underemployed for years, I ultimately declined the offer because maintaining my independence remains important to me. But I appreciated his gesture of respect and recognition. He understood my decision completely, and even said he admired my commitment to staying true to my own values, rather than accepting opportunities that might compromise my sense of self. Patricia Wellington has been the slowest to change, but even she has shown signs of growth. She's stopped making suggestions about my appearance or lifestyle choices, and she's begun asking genuine questions about my experiences, rather than making assumptions. Our relationship will probably never be warm, but it's become respectful, which feels like significant progress. The experience taught me valuable lessons about dignity and self-worth that I'll carry for the rest of my life. Staying silent when Sophia attacked me wasn't weakness, it was strength. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is refusing to engage with it at the same level, allowing others to reveal their true character through their own reactions and choices. I learned that people will always judge others based on superficial factors, like appearance, employment, or bank account balances, but those judgments reveal far more about the judges than they do about the people being evaluated. Your true value lies in your character, your integrity, and the love you show to others, especially during difficult and challenging times. Forgiveness, I discovered, doesn't mean accepting wrong behavior or pretending it didn't cause real pain. It means choosing not to let bitterness and resentment poison your own heart and future relationships. Sophia's actions were wrong and hurtful, but holding on to anger would only have damaged my own peace of mind and prevented the healing that eventually brought us together. Being a mother sometimes means allowing your children to make mistakes and learn from the natural consequences of their choices. Marcus needed to recognize what truly mattered in life, and sometimes that recognition only comes through experiencing genuine regret and shame. My job wasn't to protect him from that learning experience, but to be there when he was ready to grow from it. The most surprising discovery was that respect and support often come from the most unexpected places and people. Richard could have remained silent or supported his daughter regardless of her behavior, but he chose to stand up for what was right, even when it meant publicly criticizing his own child on her wedding day. Sometimes our most challenging and painful moments become our most transformative ones. That terrible night at the reception ultimately brought our family closer together and taught all of us lessons about courage, respect, and the difference between social status and genuine worth that we might never have learned otherwise. The experience also showed me that vulnerability and authenticity are far more powerful than any attempt to maintain perfect appearances. When I spoke honestly about our struggles and my pride in Marcus's achievements, I connected with people in ways that small talk about weather and traffic never could have accomplished. I've come to understand that true strength isn't about never being hurt or knocked down. It's about how you handle yourself when those inevitable difficult moments arrive. Dignity isn't something that can be taken from you by others. It's something you maintain through your own choices and responses, regardless of how others behave. Looking back, I realized that wedding night was never really about me at all. It was about fear, anxiety, and the pressure young people feel to meet expectations that may not even reflect their own values. Sophia's behavior was inexcusable, but it came from a place of panic rather than malice and understanding that difference made forgiveness possible. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone's true character was revealed under pressure, either your own or someone else's? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how you've handled family conflicts or found the courage to stand up for what's right when it wasn't easy. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own experiences, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and finding strength in unexpected places. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or judgments. Thank you for listening to my story with such patience and understanding, and remember that your value comes from within, not from what others think about your circumstances or background. May you always have the courage to stand tall in your truth, no matter who questions it.